I'm standing here today on the front porch of the Charles Hackley House, one of the finest Queen Anne houses to be found anywhere in North America, and an integral part of our local history. Over the next 3 episodes, we hope to show you how the County Museum is undertaking the restoration step by step of this magnificent home. It's the goal of the County Museum to bring it back to its splendor as it appeared in 1890 when Charles Hackley and his wife Julia were residents here. One of the most unique factors in working on this restoration project is not only do we have such a fine example of Victorian architecture in the Hackley House, but it's actually part of a compound. Charles Hackley built the house in conjunction with his best friend and business partner, Thomas Hume. And the house next door was that of Thomas Hume's. Together, directly behind both houses is the barn that served for both households, where the horses were kept and feed was kept and their carriages and so on. We're in the process of restoring all 3 buildings to revive this unique Victorian compound. Over the next 3 episodes, we're going to take a look at how the museum has gathered the information to redo the capital restoration, the history of the houses themselves, and then we're going to take a look at the exterior restoration and the interior restoration. So come along and join us as we take a look at our old house, the restoration of the Charles Hackley House. In the first episode of our old house, we're going to be taking a look at the history of the Charles Hackley House and its importance to our community and to the region. We're also going to take a look at the historical background that the County Museum is researching to aid us in the restoration. Now, the first point I'd like to make is that the title of this series, Our Old House, was very carefully chosen. The restoration of the buildings at the Hackley and Hume site is very much a community project. These homes are important to us because of the influence that Charles Hackley and Thomas Hume had on the development of this community for the 19th and the 20th century, and the support that has been received that has allowed us to do the restoration has very much been community-wide, county-wide, and I feel that this project is very much ours, all of ours, as citizens in this region. Charles Hackley came to Muskegon just before the Civil War. At that time, it was a sleepy little town of less than 10,000 people. Over the next 25 years, the city and the county would literally explode in economic size, population, and importance to Western Michigan. This was because of lumbering. By 1880, Charles Hackley had amassed a fortune of over $12 million. And from 1890 until the time of his death in 1905, he would return over half of that fortune, $6 million, back to the citizens of Muskegon through a series of philanthropic projects which have increased the quality of life up to the present day. Now, how and why did lumber barons like Charles Hackley begin to amass such great fortunes throughout the Muskegon region? Well, the answer very simply is white pine. Throughout the 19th century, Michigan, which had been largely unexplored and bypassed in the western migration of the United States, contained thousands of acres of white pine. Down here in Muskegon, right in the heart of that white pine territory, we had a natural waterway system with the Muskegon River that provided transportation to move this product to market. Throughout this area, lumber camps would be set up, the trees cut, and moved down to Muskegon where the sawmills would chop it up into lumber. And as a result, this became a focal point for the economic development of this side of the state. In the summer and fall of the year, lumber barons like Charles Hackley would go out and purchase prime pieces of land that contained the white pine. Working all winter long, the lumberjacks would cut the mighty white pine, and aided by the frozen ground and the snow-covered roads, would skid the sleds of trees and logs down to the riverbank. The winter's worth of cut logs would be stacked at a rollaway, a high bank overlooking the Muskegon River. In the spring, when the river's engorged with the runoff from the winter's snow, a log would be driven out. The logs would all tumble into the river, and the driving, pushing the logs down the river towards Muskegon, would begin. River rats would guide the logs down the river. This was an especially dangerous job. Trying to move the logs, keep them on their way down to the mill, avoid log jams, and keep your footing was an extremely hazardous occupation. The logs themselves were each individually marked on the end with log marks. This would allow them to be sorted out in the next phase of the operation. In this manner, millions of board feet of lumber were brought down to Muskegon Lake. Even today, we find logs popping up from the bottom of our rivers and our lakes throughout West Michigan. Once the logs arrived at the mouth of the Muskegon River, emptying into Muskegon Lake, the logs were sorted out by their log marks and set into pens for each individual company. This work was done at the booming pens, a vast complex where hundreds of workers were involved. From the booming pens, an individual company's logs would be tied together and hauled to an individual sawmill across the lake. There, the logs would be lifted up to the second floor of the mill and sawn into the rough-cut lumber. This lumber would be stacked on a dock and shipped to Chicago by means of a sailing ship. Now, throughout this whole process, throughout all of this activity, the value of the lumber kept rising. And as a result, millions of dollars were made here in the mills of Muskegon in the latter half of the 19th century. There were numerous lumber barons who amassed large fortunes, but of all of them, Charles Hackley and Thomas Hume were the most successful. By 1887, Charles Hackley, having amassed a huge fortune and being the most influential lumber baron in the region, made the decision to build the home of his dreams for both he and his wife Julia. In 1887, he purchased the last vacant lot of land on Webster Avenue. The next year, they began construction on his home as well as the house next door belonging to his business partner and friend Thomas Hume. Behind the two houses, they began construction of the city barn. We believe this photograph is the earliest known of the area. We can see men on the front porch of the Hackley house that we believe are painters putting the finishing touches on the Hackley house. In 1889, Mr. Hackley's home was complete and he and his wife Julia moved in. The house design was a strong Queen Anne style with a heavy influence of an exotic design called Moorish Revival. Charles and Julia Hackley would live in the house until their deaths in 1905. They both died a short period apart, and at that point, the house was then passed into the hands of their adopted daughter, Erie Hackley. Erie lived in the house off and on up through sometime in 1921. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, after Erie had moved west, the Hackley house was rented out to a series of families. Those families, in turn, sometimes rented out individual rooms in the house. There are residents still living here in Muskegon County who remember renting rooms and living in the Hackley house during this period. In 1943, with World War II raging throughout the world, Erie Hackley made the decision to donate the Hackley house to the American Red Cross. Here in Muskegon, the Red Cross took the building over, made some minor modifications to it, and made it into the region's first blood drive center. They operated in the house through the 1970s when they acquired new offices on Webster Avenue. By 1971, the three buildings of the historic site were falling into disrepair. A group of community citizens got together and made the decision that they were important and deserved to be saved and restored. Gathering community support from the Muskegon Chronicle, the Quadrangle Club, the Greater Muskegon Women Club, and the Questers, the Hackley Heritage Association was born. For the next 20 years, the Hackley Heritage Association would work to stabilize the 3 properties at the site and to begin initial attempts at restoration. In particular, one man, Mr. Herb Strom, led the way. His love of the houses led to the beginnings of their restoration process and set a standard for excellence, which we're still working to achieve. In 1986, the voters of Muskegon County approved a countywide millage to provide the economic support to aid in the restoration of the houses. At that time, the properties were transferred to the Muskegon County Museum. Since 1986, the museum has been working to do a museum quality restoration on the 3 buildings. Here in the recent past, we've been working on the Hackley House. The objective of the museum is to restore the Hackley House to its early 1890s appearance as it looked when Charles and Julia Hackley first moved in. In addition to the work being done on the Hackley House restoration, returning it to its 1890s appearance when Charles and Julia first moved in, long-range plans have also been made to guide the work for the Hume House and the barn. The 3 buildings of the site were designed by architect David Hopkins. A native of Argyle, New York, Hopkins came to Michigan in 1864. Working from his office in Grand Rapids, he designed all 3 buildings. He was also well known for his mail-order catalogs of house and barn plans. The design chosen by David Hopkins was, as has been described, Queen Anne. Now, this style is unique for its time because of all the varied detail that the Queen Anne style incorporates. What is unique about the Hackley House, however, is that it has this varied texture and detail, but unlike most Queen Anne houses, every one of these details was individually made specifically for the Hackley House. This image of one of the stained glass windows, which are another unique item of the Hackley House, show how Hopkins mixed styles. Here in a Queen Anne pattern, we have the addition of mihrab, which is a horseshoe shape. Mihrab is usually found in Moorish designs and specifically on Islamic prayer rugs. This is an example of the kind of exotic design style that was very popular throughout the 1880s and 90s. Another example of the Moorish revival design throughout the house is the onion or Turkish dome on the barn. Another important architectural feature of a Queen Anne home is variations in sidewall surfaces. By this I mean a difference in texture, pattern, and color. As in other cases, however, we find on the Hackley House, this variation goes to extremes that would not normally be found in a Queen Anne house. A Queen Anne house usually has a large one-story porch that may, as in the case of the Hackley House, wrap around to the side. What's unique about these porches is their decorative trim, usually called gingerbread. Once again, however, in examining the Hackley House, we find that this is far from standard gingerbread. This is all uniquely designed and custom crafted for this particular house. Another architectural element often found on a Queen Anne style house is a tower on the front, on one corner of the front facade. As we see moving around the Hackley House, it's made up of literally hundreds of architectural elements. And in order to preserve the splendor of this magnificent house, each one of these architectural elements is going to have to be addressed in the restoration phase. Having identified the architectural significance of the house, we're now ready to begin the restoration process. But long before we can hire carpenters, we can begin to work on the individual elements of architectural significance, there's a lot of research that has to be done to ensure the accuracy of the finished project. Now, how does the Muskegon County Museum go about this research? Well, we have 3 sources of information. Number 1 is documentary, taking a look at those papers, receipts, photographs, bills, and so on that have survived. Secondly, we take a look at the physical evidence. A house is just like an archaeological site. Over time, as people have modified it, have repainted it, or made changes to it, there are traces of information that can be examined by digging through the layers. And finally, we can go and take a look at other restoration projects and other research that's been done on similar types of houses to see how they have addressed problems and to take a look at what conclusions they have come up with. Another example of documentary evidence that we have for our research is the large number of photographs that still exist of the Hackley house. Fortunately, because of his prominence in the community and his wealth, the exterior of his home was photographed a number of times throughout the years. Likewise, the interior of the house was photographed shortly after they moved in. These images are important documents to aid us in the restoration work. Fortunately for the Hackley House project, many of the business papers of the Hackley and Hume Company still exist at the archives located at Michigan State University. These papers were saved by Mrs. Jean Hume Browning, a descendant of Thomas Hume. While not complete, they do provide hundreds of pieces of information on the lives of the families involved in these houses and on the construction of the houses themselves. A graduate student at the university has been hired by the museum to search through these boxes of documents page by page and to duplicate anything that has to do with the houses themselves. This information is forwarded to the museum and will then be incorporated in reports. An example of the type of document that's being retrieved from the Hackley and Hume business papers is this check made out to the Kelly Brothers Manufacturing Company. All of these little bits and pieces of historical information about the house are brought together and examined by the museum staff. The museum director is personally responsible for the actual restoration of the house. The site administrator at the Hackley and Hume Historic Site is responsible for taking this historical information and formulating it into a series of planning documents, such as historic furnishing plans, historic structure reports, and so on. These documents are what aid and guide the restoration process. Here in episode 1, we've been taking a look at the architectural and historical significance of the Hackley house. One of the things we found is that in its Queen Anne design, it is a rich and varied mixture of textures, designs, and styles. One of the key elements of a Queen Anne house is that you should be able to look at it a second time and never see the same thing twice. We find this throughout the architectural elements as well as in the interior decorative treatments. Now, the first part of this episode was filmed over at the Muskegon County Museum, where we have produced an exhibit that explores the topics that we've discussed in the first half of the show. We've now moved across the park and are standing in the Muskegon Museum of Art, where the second half of the exhibit is on display. This part of the exhibit takes those individual architectural elements out of the context of the house and explores them for the rich and varied splendor on their own right. An example is the side door. When viewing the house, the detail of this door sometimes gets lost. We can see the horseshoe mirab design that we've been talking about. We can see the wood carving that has been described. But just looking at this door, it becomes an art object itself. And this, I think, points out the importance of all of the variety of details that we find in the Hackley house. One element of the job of historian that I enjoy most is the fact that we're quite often involved in detective-like work. In doing research, we uncovered these photographs of the interior of the house. This particular one is of the first parlor, and in going traveled, and that they were heavily influenced by the newest and latest in designs and fashion statements of the period. Recently donated to the museum, we know that this piece of furniture had a prominent place in the Hackley's interior decorative scheme. It's actually a small curio cabinet, but once again, it's a prime example of the varied texture and design that would have been found in every single item in and around the house. In the collaboration to research and produce this exhibit at the Museum of Art, we've worked closely with the staff to take a look at the decorative elements and the artistic styles found in the Hackley House. Standing here with me is Henry Matthews, who is the curator and currently interim director of the Museum of Art. And I've asked Henry to join us to get some of his insights into the design elements and styles that we find in the Hackley House. Welcome, Henry.
Hello, thank you. Welcome to the museum.
In taking a look at the objects that we've taken out of context and brought here into the galleries, what has been your reaction and the public's reaction in taking a look at these objects and the designs behind them?
Well, I think the first thing that hits you is how rich and intricate they are, which is something that sort of gets lost when they're in context. Mm-hmm. You know, the rooms are so richly decorated, there isn't a relief space anywhere, and that's what makes it wonderful. And it was completely in keeping with the tradition and the times and the modes of the times of the late 19th century to have a house that was just filled with a great variety of styles and materials and lavishness. And so there's nothing wrong with that. The nice thing is, by pulling these things out, these objects out, and having a chance to look at them in an almost I don't want to say sterile, but isolated manner, you can suddenly recognize and appreciate the incredible detail and the skill involved in producing just these items on a single basis. When you look at these chairs, they become sort of a tour de force of not only of carving but also of design, because we're dealing with so many different mixtures. We're talking about the basic shape of the chair is that of a great medieval chair that would have been used at the head of a table or possibly even as a throne. But and the material is there as well. But then the detailed carving, the twisted columns are a reference to Solomonic columns. You can see that at the Cathedra Petri in Rome, the great Bernini columns, and a reference to originally the temple of Jerusalem. And then the rich carvings here, these acanthus leaves, which are reference again to the classical world, the Roman world, and will be picked up again in the Baroque period and now mixed together with this basic medieval style. I mean, they don't really make sense when you start taking them apart, but that's the fun of it for us, because we're looking at them with hindsight and seeing where they borrowed from all these different times. Now, you know, the lines are great fun. They're almost cartoon-like, and I don't know that they were intended to be funny, but they certainly strike us that way today. I think
here in this day and age, yes.
Today, right. 80 years later, 90 years after they were made.
Well, Henry, throughout episode 1, in taking a look at the artistic styles, we've been emphasizing the point that what makes the Hackley House so unique is that not only you have a typical conglomeration of patterns and designs that you would find in decorative elements of this period, but that in the Hackley House, they were of the highest quality. They were all specially made for the house. And did you find that when you began to examine the furniture and the windows that we have here in this gallery?
Absolutely. These are premier objects of the very finest quality. These are as good as anything you'll find if you go to Europe and visit the great castles or the private homes, which when we do, we always feel the need to take a picture. Well, a friend of mine says, when he looks at something like this, he says, you know, if we were in Europe, we'd take a picture of it. Well, I think we can do it even now when we're not.
Right here in Muskegon.
Right here in Muskegon, because they are of that quality. And they really do speak to us about the taste of the time. You know, when we think about what we accept today in our homes, a rather sterile surrounding, we prefer white walls or very clean lines, and that's really important to us overall. I mean, certainly there are the exceptions to the collectors, but the ultimate house of the highest design of the turn of the century was a very sophisticated mixture of everything the world has to offer. So we're seeing Orientalism, we're seeing all the past historic styles mixed together beautifully, and it's really very sophisticated and as you said, of the very highest quality.
Well, Henry, when you take a look at these objects, and when you look at the historic photographs that we've uncovered of the interior of the house, it appears at first glance that it is just a mixture. It's a jumble of things. But through your eyes as an art historian, is this just a mishmash, or is this a carefully designed and constructed environment that was built for the Hackleys?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a carefully designed environment. I think somebody really thought about what was going in here. The use of materials, the different woods, the carvings, the color scheme, which we're just beginning to put back together again through all kinds of clues, and you're working with restorers to find those. This is not a happy accident. This is a very carefully planned environment, and is an environment that was meant to be read by the visitor as in very specific messages were being sent. It says, you know, I'm an important social person, I have the best taste, I have lots of money, this is where it's happening, this is sort of the apex of society. And I think that's exactly what was intended to be conveyed, and I think that message is loud and clear.
And those kinds of visual statements that we're reading from the photographs and that are coming out through the restoration process, those were the types of statements that a well-to-do person would make and communicate in a home of the period.
Absolutely, because that strata of society, really, when we start to think about it, these are all self-made men and women, but they're imitating something else. They're imitating the European aristocracy, which has been in these kind of homes for centuries. And in Europe, they would have lived. A house like this might be 1,000 years old or 500 years old, and they might actually have a medieval chair and a Roman example and all. But in the 19th century, the style was to mix and match and put it all together and borrow from everyone. Well, of course, in this country, we're so young and so new, we didn't have all these styles to borrow from, and we don't have the old things, so we're making up our own versions of them. And that's exactly, I think, what happened here.
Throughout this program, we've been taking a look at the history and significance of the Hackley house. I think we've also been taking a look at Charles Hackley the man. We've been taking a look at how he amassed a fortune, the house that he built for his wife, and how he himself lived. I think that one of the regrets that I might have as a historian is that I've completed so much research and investigated this man's life so much that I feel that I know him, and yet we'll never have the opportunity to meet him and to shake his hand. We are in the process of restoring his home to its appearance as it was when he first moved in. In the next two shows, we're going to be taking a look at the actual restoration techniques used for both the exterior and interior work. We hope that you'll be able to join us for episodes 2 and 3, and we certainly appreciate the fact that you've joined us today for this episode of Our Old House. I'm standing here today on the front porch of the Charles Hackley house, one of the finest Queen Anne houses to be found anywhere in North America, and an integral part of our local history. Over the next 3 episodes, we hope to show you how the County Museum is undertaking the restoration step by step of this magnificent home. It's the goal of the County Museum to bring it back to its splendor as it appeared in 1890 when Charles Hackley and his wife Julia were residents here. One of the most unique factors in working on this restoration project is not only do we have such a fine example of Victorian architecture in the Hackley house, but it's actually part of a compound.
Charles Hackley built the house in conjunction with his best friend and business partner, Thomas Hume. And the house next door was that of Thomas Hume's. Together, directly behind both houses, is the barn that served for both households, where the horses were kept and feed was kept and their carriages and so on. We're in the process of restoring all three buildings to revive this unique Victorian compound. Over the next 3 episodes, we're going to take a look at how the museum has gathered the information to redo the Capitol restoration, the history of the houses themselves, and then we're going to take a look at the exterior restoration and the interior restoration. So come along and join us as we take a look at our old house, the restoration of the Charles Hackley house. Welcome to episode 3 of Our Old House. This has been a series of programs that's taken a look at the restoration work being done on the Charles Hackley house here in Muskegon, Michigan. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the interior work that's being done. We're going to look at the work being done on the walls, the woodwork, the hows and the whys of these restoration attempts. When we looked at the exterior restoration, we described how we began the project from the top to the bottom. We started off with the roof, so we'd have a sound base to work underneath. Well, interior restoration is in many ways similar. We start with the big projects first. In the historical research described in episode 1, we found that the Hackley house was lit by gas lights when it was first built in 1888 and 1899, when the Hackley family first moved in. Our research has also shown that during the time of the Hackley family occupancy, there was no electricity in the house. As a result, the first project we worked on for interior restoration was to set up a system, design a way in which we could replicate gas lighting effects and yet have the safety and convenience of a modern electrical system. Because of that, the first thing we did was to go around the house, and as we'll see right here, to remove the electrical switches. The same is true of any outlets that were visible in every room. We designed a system of bringing electricity to the location of the old gas light fixtures, and the switching mechanisms are all hidden in a closet where we can run the entire system by master control dimming switches. Now, these dimming switches will allow us to crank up the light, if you will, when we're doing work inside the house. And then during visitation hours, we'll be able to dim the lights down to recreate the look of the old gas lights. In rewiring the house, we were fortunate in that we didn't have to open up the walls at all, and in most places we were able to run the wiring through either the attic or through the basement. There were some places on the first floor where we had to bring the wiring into the ceiling on the first floor. And as such, we opened up the wooden floor of the hallways upstairs. And we can see here where we were able to lift up the boards. Interestingly enough, when we did this, we found that this is the way the house had originally been electrified when it was the old knob and tube electrical system. More importantly, when we opened up these floorboards, we found the original gas pipes. And by tracking these pipes, how they teed off and dropped down to the rooms downstairs, we were able to document the exact location of the original gas lights. In some cases, we were even able to pull the wire through the original gas pipes and didn't even require the running of new conduit. Now, an example of how we introduced electricity to replicate the gas lighting is here in this hallway that leads from the front foyer back to the kitchen of the Hackley house. When we began restoration of the house, there was an electric light directly over my head, which was approximately in the center of the hallway. We conducted research throughout this area trying to find evidence of a gas pipe coming out where the original gas light fixture was. We were puzzled. It took us a period of over 6 months to find out where that pipe came down. And surprisingly, the original gas light was not anywhere near the center of the hall where they had later installed an electric light. We instead found that the gas light was here towards this end. It was centered between the doorway, between the dining room and the second parlor. As a result, when you come in and take a look at the house today,
you'll find that our electricity and our reproduction gas light is going to hang in this spot. Now, for right now, we have a simple modern fixture up there until the replica gas lights can be created and electrified. Now, as we described in episode 1, we have a great deal of historic and documentary evidence that's helping us in the interior restoration of the house. We do have interior photographs of many of the rooms here in the Hackley house. But those photographs only show us so much detail and only give us so much information, of course, because they're in black and white. We're fortunate in that most of the interior spaces we have original extant physical evidence. Unfortunately, uncovering that evidence can sometimes be a very time-consuming trial. Let me give you an example. Once again, we're here in the foyer, in the entryway of the Hackley house. Now, we know that the Hackleys, as well as subsequent inhabitants of this house, redecorated the interior of these spaces many times. When we take a look at the Hackley house as it is right now, we see that the foyer walls are covered with this fabric. Now, our research has shown that this fabric could not have been put on the walls earlier than 1920. Actually, this fabric first appears in the United States in the Orinoco Mills catalogs in 1920. That's what we base it on. And we suspect that this was actually put in this room about 1930, long after the period that we're trying to restore its appearance to. So what we need to do is act almost as archaeologists and to cut through the layers to find the original surfaces, such as those that match the photographs. So what we've done is to begin opening up these surfaces and going through them layer by layer, just as an archaeologist would. And what we found was kind of interesting. Underneath this brown fabric, and I'm going to cut a section of this open here so you can see it, underneath this brown fabric, we found that underneath here was a layer of wallpaper. Now, this wallpaper is in a green and light green striping pattern that's reminiscent of colonial revival interiors. The colonial revival period was all the rage about 1905, 1910. So once again, this is after the period that we're trying to restore. Now, in our research, we began peeling up this wallpaper, and we found underneath 3 coats of paint. Now, having removed that 2-colored green wallpaper and finding those 3 layers of paint, I realized that we were quickly approaching the point where we needed some outside help. To dig through those 3 layers of paint was going to require professional expertise that was beyond the limits of what I currently have on my staff. We brought in the paint analyst who did the exterior work on the house. And climbing up on the ladder here above the mantel, he began layer by layer pulling away the different paints. What we find is directly underneath of the wallpaper was a red paint scheme with a gold lace stencil pattern on top. Again, this is a pattern and colors that we would expect to find right around the turn of the century. Going through that red paint layer was found a tan layer with a vine-like ribbon pattern. And underneath that layer, we found the original. Once the paint analyst had gotten down to the original layer, he was then able to make detailed drawings, blueprints if you will, of exactly what the patterns looked like. Now, most importantly here, we were able to determine the size and scale of the individual pieces of the pattern, something that would be almost impossible to do from the photographs alone. And more importantly, he was able to take small fragments of the paint, the original paint, and then analyze them under a microscope. Now, keep in mind that the color has changed over time due to other glues and other paints that were laying on top, as well as dirt and dust, while this was the only coat of paint on the walls. And so the paint analyst, looking with those through the microscope with those small chips of paint, had to determine what the original color looked like. Then he would go back to his blueprints and create for us an almost paint-by-number scheme that we could use then with the contractors who would come in to do the recreation of these original wall stenciling. The dining room of the Hackley house was the first room in which we were able to replicate the stenciling based on the research done by the paint analyst. The photograph that we saw just a few moments ago showed us what the room looked like, but only through the eyes of a black and white lens. As we can see from the colors displayed here, based on the paint analyst's work, this is a vibrant, bright, active room. We actually found that there are 14 different colors in this one stenciling pattern. Now, the Victorians were very concerned about light and used light a great deal in their interior decorative schemes. Remember, the house was only lit with gaslight. Our research has shown that here in the dining room, there was only one main light that sat over the table in the center of the room. And so in order to give this room more decoration, to make it more alive, a stenciling pattern was developed that would reflect off of the light coming from either the windows or at night from the gas light. And that's what makes this stenciling of this period of time so intricate and so detailed. Let me show you what I mean. Here we have the main pattern, and as we can see, every so often this comes into what's called a repeat. This is pretty simple and pretty standard in all stenciling patterns. But throughout the 1880s, this high fashion stenciling included a number of other elements. You'll see there's a number of additional colors that are added here, and then there's always a bold, strong line. This is called a shadow line. And when you look at the room as a total, you'll notice that the shadow lines are always either on one side or the other, opposite of the major light sources. And as a result, this stenciling takes on a different appearance during different times of the day. In the early morning, it'll appear to have one set of colors. In the afternoon, as the light's moving around the windows, it'll appear to have a different look. And at night, under the feeble, dim gas lights, it will have a completely different appearance again. Coming back to the idea of a Queen Anne house, you'll never be able to look at it twice and see the same thing. From our discussion out in the foyer, when we took a look at the different layers of fabric and wallpaper and paint, we know that the Hackley house is going through a number of interior decorative schemes. The same's true here in the front parlor. The ceiling, as it appears today, is much different than what it looked like originally. We can see up here as a molding running along the where the wall meets the ceiling, this decorative plaster treatment, and up on the ceiling we have a somewhat elaborate pattern that covers the entire ceiling from wall edge to wall edge. Now, examining this pattern, we realized that this is a colonial revival style, and we felt that this was probably added much later. By uncovering one corner of these plaster patterns, we found that it was, in fact, about the third treatment, decorative treatment, that occurred in this room. So as a result, we're going to be removing this plaster work and going back to the original style. Now, fortunately, we have the photographs to work from. Again, we have existing physical evidence underneath these patterns, and we also have in the second parlor an example of what the original molding looked like. Now, our plan is to take the contour of that original molding from the second parlor and to have it replicated in a new modern product. We have found a firm that will create it for us in 8-foot lengths, and we'll actually be able to attach it right up here in the wall and then paint over it with a prime, and it will give us the surface to recreate the stenciling on top of. I would venture to guess that of all of the elements on the inside and the outside of this house, the one that remains most in the memory of our visitors is probably the woodwork. Now, just like the other elements that we've been describing in the house, everything was custom made for this interior scheme. When we take a look at this work, it's really remarkable. And as we're going through and examining it, we're constantly finding new items, new stories, new themes that have been carved into it. Just here today, working under the lights of the cameras, we realized that the lions here and all of these natural elements in this piece here in the corner of the foyer.
We're very fortunate in that over the years, this woodwork has remained in remarkably good condition. So fortunately, we're not going to have to do any major restoration work to it. What we'll do is when we have all the plaster walls done and the painting is done on the stenciling, we're going to come in and just very gently clean this woodwork. We'll use a mild detergent, very soft rags, and basically take the dust off of it, and when that's finished, it'll be ready for display. I'm kind of looking forward to that process because it's going to give us an opportunity to work up close and to really examine all the intricacies of all of these beautiful carvings that we have throughout the house. I think that there's another element that's equally as unique as the woodwork inside this house, and that, of course, is the stained glass windows. Now, these windows were a point of pride for Mr. Hackley. They were specially ordered and installed here. And once again, talking about light, as the sun moves around the house, we get a variety of different colors that are coming in and highlighting the walls and the floors. They are really, truly unique pieces in and of their own right, as we saw in episode 1, could be on display at any art museum. Now, like everything else, these windows need some help. And in order to take a look at how we're going about the restoration of these stained glass windows, let's go back for a moment into the restoration shop over in the basement of the Hume House. Another major architectural element that we're working on down here in the shop is the windows. Over time, the windows have suffered the same effects of damage that we see in other wooden elements of the house. Now, one of the types of windows that we're working on are the stained glass windows, of which the Hackley house is well known. Now, actually, the term stained glass is kind of a misnomer here. Some of these individual sections of glass like this are actually stained glass, but the true technical term for these windows is leaded glass. This ribbing that we see in here is called lead cane. It's an H-shaped piece of material, much like looks somewhat like a railroad tie in miniature. Now, what happens is this lead cane is flexible so that it can be bent around the glass, and where the H shape is holds the pieces of glass on each side. Now, over time, this lead will begin to weaken, particularly in an area where you've had a lot of industrialization and a lot of coal burning, as we've had here in Muskegon over the last 100 years. All of that industrial coal burning creates a lot of acid rain, and that acid rain striking the surface of this lead cane will weaken it. What happens is the lead cane, as it weakens and loses its strength, will begin to buckle and bow. And we see that in old leaded glass windows, how they begin to wave. What happens is that window begins to wave and sag underneath its own weight, is that the individual pieces of glass will crack. Now, in order to restore this, what we do is pull the window out, and then we pull out all of the material around the window, take the actual leaded glass window out, and we have found a gentleman here in Muskegon County who's an expert at stained glass, leaded glass restoration. He will actually take every individual piece of glass apart out of the window and replace the lead cane. Now, the lead cane that we're using as a replacement is better than what was available 100 years ago. In addition, we're adding in a thin copper wire, which over time will give it even more structural strength. After he's replaced the lead cane and put the glass back together, it's brought back here to the shop and put back into the window frame, which has been restored using the wood techniques that we saw earlier. When it's all finished, of course, it's then painted, and as the carpenters come back on for the summer season, this window will be put back in place. Now, the same process is used on each and every window in the house, although those with a solid glass pane don't require the lead work that we described. In every case, the glass section is taken out, the woodwork is done, the glass has to be replaced, put back in, and then the whole section is primed and painted, ready to be installed back in the house. We get a lot of questions when we put them back in the house. Why did you paint the inside yellow? Well,
Throughout the house, we find a variety of different types of woods. As a matter of fact, we haven't even identified all of them that are in these carved pieces. But we know that the window frames were made out of pine. It's a soft, durable wood, very common for a window frame. And when the Hackley's architect was designing this, we know that he had them painted a mild color, and then the artisans who were working on the stenciling of the wall would come in and do a technique called faux. What they would do is to paint the pine window frames with a wood graining technique that would make them look like the hardwood that surrounds them in the carved pieces. We've been told by the people we're working with that this yellow color is the best base color to do that fauxing technique on. As we get some of these other elements done, we'll come through and faux these like the original artist did, and you won't be able to distinguish this pine frame from this wood here. One of the most enjoyable parts of my duties as the person who's in charge of the restoration of this house has been trying to decipher what some of the carvings and the meanings are of the carvings here inside the house. I've uncovered hundreds of examples that you might expect. For instance, food items in the dining room and in the second parlor, which was Mrs. Hackley's parlor, artistic elements, paint and music symbolisms. But there's a lot more here that we're slowly beginning to uncover. Let me give you an example. We're here in the foyer, an area that separates the visitor to the house from the outside world into the civilized civility of the home. And so most of the carvings in here deal with mankind or humanity, or in many cases weather. I was standing right in this spot one day with a group of young visitors, and I had a young lady ask me, well, what do the carvings up here mean? It looks like the Cupid's asleep over here. And I took a look, and I saw on the left-hand side a carving of Cupid and a night owl, and in Cupid's hand is a torch, but the torch is beginning to burn out. On the opposite side of the same panel, I see another carving of a Cupid, and this Cupid is wide awake, and it appears as if he's flying through the sky with a blazing torch in his hand. And I puzzled on this for a long time and suddenly realized that the architect had carved in here the symbolism for night and day. This woodwork, we believe, is so unique that it's going to take us years to understand all of the symbolism and all of the detail that's presented in this house. One of the last elements that we'll be addressing on the interior restoration will be that of floor coverings. After looking at the historic photographs, we know that both the first and second floors were covered in wall-to-wall carpeting. Further physical evidence is shown here. When we look at these pine boards here, they're quite attractive to us today. However, this would have been the equivalent of plywood in about 1890, and this would have had a covering over it. We can also see evidence here at the height of the tiles that surround the base of the chimney. They're so high, placed so high because the carpet would be laid up against them to make one level, even surface. Based on the information we have from the photographs and from taking a look at carpet samples from the period, we'll be able to replicate the wall-to-wall carpeting in all of these rooms. I hope that you've enjoyed your tour through the restoration of the Hackley House. As you can see, it's a process that's somewhat complicated, but I think we'll do justice to this great house. Now, the work that you've seen us doing would not be possible without the support of the residents of Muskegon County, and we certainly appreciate that support, and we hope that the residents are as proud of the work as we, the staff doing it, are. We also would like to thank the craftsmen that we found here in Muskegon County. We found an amazing amount of talent that's required for this sometimes high-tech kind of work. And I'd also like to express my appreciation to the Muskegon Community College and to Colby Place Productions that have assisted the Muskegon County Museum in producing these programs. We look forward to the possibility of expanding our educational programs through TV series like this in the future, and we hope that you've enjoyed our old house.